Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a first look at an exciting upcoming tier 9 French medium tank, the Vercingetorix. This thing has a long and complicated name. However, interestingly, and I'm going to say this straight off the bat, some of you might recognize that name. If any of you are a fan of the Asterix comic series, Vercingetorix is a name of one of the main characters. And potentially, this is signifying or kind of signaling to a future collaboration between Asterix and World of Tanks. As to what form that, collaboration would take, God knows at this point. But there you go. Let's actually have a look at this tank now. So, it is a pretty traditional French medium tank straight away. I will say that off the bat. It's got decent DPM. 2,243 is actually quite nice. It's packing 400 alpha, which is actually really, really nice at this kind of meta we've got at the minute where alpha is king. Having a medium tank at tier 9 with 400 alpha is pretty comfortable. A 10.7-second reload, which is, once again, quite nice. Pen values. 248mm AP does lack a little bit. However, it's definitely workable, especially as it's AP, so its normalization is okay. But its gold penetration is where this tank is actually kind of okay. 297 APCR. It isn't the best, don't get me wrong. There are French tanks, and there are, just medium tanks in general that have better penetration. 297 APCR with fast shell velocity is quite comfortable. However, we come to a little bit of a sticking point already with this tank. It's gun handling. 2.5 seconds aim time is okay. Definitely workable. However, its dispersion of 0.38 for a medium tank with decent DPM, yeah, that's not incredible. You are going to definitely want to run V-stabs on this tank to improve those soft gun handling statistics. However, still, even then, 0.38 is going to feel quite derpy, and it will struggle at medium to long range. That is just the nature of having worse than 0.36 dispersion. It will feel okay at close range, however, medium to long, it will struggle. 8 degrees of gun depression is really quite nice, comfortable for a medium tank. Mobility-wise, this thing is interesting. It has a mode. It is going to be the first French tank to have the CS63's speed mode. So what does that mean? Well, that means that this tank can go 40 when it's going normal. However, when it switches into its speed mode, it can go 60, which is really quite comfortable. 60 allows you to get into some of those more aggressive positions and to be able to start laying down the fire a little bit earlier than other medium tanks. Reverse speed, 14 out of the mode, 20 in the mode, 20 out of in the mode is okay. However, you're never really firing in the mode, so do definitely bear that in mind. Mobility and survivability, 1650 is okay. Definitely on the lower end, however, definitely workable. Its hull armor of 110mm is where we start to kind of go, this thing doesn't look incredibly well armored. Its hull, its lower plate looks huge. Looks definitely like a pretty big weak point. And its upper hull doesn't look particularly well angled. It looks quite flat. It might be okay against AP, APCR from tier 8, tier 9 tanks. However, as soon as the tank starts firing heat at you, yeah, I think that hull is just going to be butter. Turret armor of 220 at the front. It looks quite nice. It looks very well angled. It's got a pretty big gun mantler. However, I'm already concerned that there's going to be a shot trap underneath the gun where shots ricochet down into the upper hull. And in general, I feel like this turret, as soon as you turn it straight from front, it's pretty big. This entire side will become flat as soon as you are not directly facing your opponent, which will be a pretty big weak point. And it does have 2 cupolas, one slightly bigger than the other, which definitely do look like they're going to be a pretty big weak point. However, in general, it's got quite a nice package there. But let's compare it to some other tanks at tier 9. So, let's compare the Vercingetorix to the DZT-159, which is the tier 9 Chinese medium tank with the rocket boosters, and the AMX-30, which is just a traditional French, now kind of not tech tree, collector's tank medium tank. So, in terms of DPM, The Vercingetorix is very similar to the DZT. 2242 compared to 2256. Not necessarily comparable to the AMX30's 2689, which is lovely. In terms of alpha, the Vercin is kind of smack bang between the DZT and the AMX30. The DZT's 440 alpha is one of its big, pulling points. It's one of the big things that gives it such power. Having 400 is not quite the same. However, it is better than the AMX30's 390, but 400 in today's meta is still quite nice. 10.7 second reload time, smack bang between the AMX30 and the DZT. That gives it its, middle ground DPM. In terms of dispersion, it's better than the DZT, so 0.38 compared to 0.4. The DZT's dispersion is definitely one of its weak factors. It's quite derpy, and a lot of people do definitely struggle with that. So 0.38 will be better. However, it isn't as good as the AMX30's 0.37, but none of these tanks are particularly well known for their gun handling. And the Vercingetorix is going to be nothing new there. It will definitely struggle. However, at short range, 0.38 is definitely workable, whereas at short range, 0.4, which the DZT has, does still feel quite derpy. Aim time of 2.5 seconds, once again, smack bang between the AMX30 and the DZT, workable. However, could be better, right, at the end of the day. However, this is where we look at this thing's mobility. So 40 forwards out of its speed mode is nice. It's exactly the same as the DZT when it's not using its rocket boosters. However, it doesn't compare to the AMX30, which goes 65 all the time. It doesn't have a mode, it doesn't have rocket boosters. The powerful thing with the Vercingetorix having a speed mode allows it to kind of run away from position quicker than people expect it to. It gives that instant acceleration. Same with the DZT. That's the powerful thing with the DZT. However, the Vercingetorix, I feel, is going to be better mobility-wise than the DZT, because the DZT only gets 7 uses of its rocket boosters, whereas the Vercingetorix gets unlimited use of its switching the mode. So you've got kind of a nice comparison there between how quick can it go when it's in its mode, 60. How does that compare to the DZT, which only has 7 uses to go 68? How does it compare to the AMX30, which goes 65 all the time? So definitely consider those things. Mobility-wise in reverse, 14 standard. It's okay. It's not as good as the DZT's, which doesn't get a boost with its rocket boosters. However, the AMX30 with its 23 in reverse is just a peculiar little freak. So it doesn't really compare there. Gun depression-wise, 8 degrees. Very similar to the AMX30, which is identical. And it's slightly better than the DZT's 7. HP-wise, 1650. As I said, it's pretty average. It's nothing special. There are definitely higher HP'd medium tanks at tier 9, but 1656 smack bang in the middle. View range, 380. It's actually the worst out of these in this comparison, but it's workable, right? You shouldn't really be playing this tank as a scout anyway, in my opinion. In terms of its armor, here's where we start to see potentially how weak it might be. So, if any of you have ever played the AMX30, its hull is horrendous. This thing is going to kind of, I feel, be a little bit similar to the AMX30's hull. If not, slightly more like the DZT's, which is definitely weak, especially when it's on flat ground, because it's not particularly well angled. And its its turret armor, I don't think it's going to be great. I think it might be okay frontally, but as I said, as soon as you turn that left or right, its huge side turret is going to be a pretty flat spot, and that's just going to be penned by pretty much everything. Think of tanks like the M5Y, which suffer from that issue. As soon as it turns its turret, its entire side turret becomes cannibal. Penetration values, it's got identical pretty much to the AMX30. It doesn't compare to the DZT, which one of its big, things that it has is its penetration on top of its alpha. The 248mm AP standard compared to the DZT's 260. Not really a comparison there. The DZT just wins that one. Gold penetration of 297. It's okay, but it doesn't compare, once again, to the DZT's 310 heat and actually the AMX30's 300mm heat. So there you go. That's the Vercingetorix. I still don't even know if I'm saying that right. If there's any French people, please do correct me down below and have a laugh at me. But I think generally this tank looks okay. I think it's actually quite nice to see a single-shot French tank coming to the Supertest. We seem to have had a lot of auto-loaders or auto-reloaders recently, so it's actually quite nice to kind of see a traditional single-shot medium for once and to see where they're progressing and where they think it should fit within today's meta. I think this tank will be good. I do. I think it would be all right. I don't think it's going to be incredible. I don't think it's going to be terrible. I think it's going to play very similar to the AMX 30, if not slightly better. It might play a little bit like the Out Proto 30, the Tier 8 French medium tank. That's the premium one that got buffed recently. I think it'll play a little bit similar to that. Maybe just having to be a little bit more careful to not get caught out, because that thing's armor is a little bit better tier for tier than this. However, it's a bit of an enigma, right? It's got a single shot gun, but it's got no speed mobility mode from the CS63, which is the first time we're seeing it outside of the CS63. And, you know, if you'd want to include it, you know, the MLE thing, the Tier 9 French light. It's the first time we're seeing it come to the French line like this, and I think it looks okay. I think, as I said, this thing is going to be a collaboration with the Asterix, whether that be for a battle pass or maybe some other form. I don't really know. But I think it looks quite interesting. I'm excited to see whether this thing gets any changes, because I feel like this thing will definitely get some buffs to its gun handling. Just because I feel, you know, 0.38 in 2.5 seconds is pretty poor, and I feel like it could maybe do with 0.36, 2.2 seconds aim time. But that might just be me wanting a tank to be slightly overpowered. But as I said, I think this thing will be pretty good. Not overpowered, but pretty average. Do let me know if you agree down in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all again very soon.